Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome to Knowledge Line, Episode 3, Part 3. My name is Tony Okonma and I'm your host. Today we are continuing our very interesting conversation we've been having on promise, and we shall today be looking at the dangers and consequences of failed promise. We are hopeful that this will be the concluding part of a long journey we had undertaken on a very interesting, all the same heated conversation on promise and promise making. We shall be looking closely into promise as arising among strangers and promise in intimate relationship. Most consensus of philosophers and analysts is that promise arises among strangers, but there is a failed promise that is dangerous and should be avoided, and that is promise arising in an intimate relationship. The opinion of most analysts is that promise arising among strangers is easier to navigate and manage than promise in an intimate relationship. We shall, in the course of our discussion, be looking into a few illustrations that will help us to understand this deep but interesting knowledge line. Jane and Rogers were colleagues, and the relationship between them at this time was that of strangers. They had nothing binding them than the fact that they were workmates. Jane fell into financial difficulty and approached Rogers for assistance of a loan with a promise to pay back the borrowed money at the given date. As time went on, Jane and Rogers became very close, and their intimacy developed into a sexual relationship. Jane defaulted with the loan repayment when Rogers had need of his money and requested payment from Jane. A rift ensued between Jane and Rogers, as Jane claimed she thought Rogers had written off the loan in consideration of their relationship. She said she believed she had adequately paid back the loan with sexual orgies they had been having. She was of the opinion that being in a sexual relationship with Rogers was enough repayment and sacrifice for the borrowed money. Before we go further, let's look at what makes a breach of promise in an intimate relationship dangerous and damaging. Whatever obligations existed before the intimacy is often and easily flouted by either party. But the injurious afflictions are long-lasting and in most cases irreparable. Where there is no clear set objective, promise in an intimate relationship should be avoided. The parties must clearly understand and agree on the position of the promise in an intimate relationship to avoid Markovitch's assertion that a breach of the promise does not return the parties to where they started, but sets them apart further than strangers. Opinions are evenly divided regarding Jane and Rogers, who acted more honorably. And that's the question. Remember, Rogers gave assistance based on trust. However, some still argue that his motive may never be known. But was Jane making a secondary line promise when she said to Rogers she was going to repay the money she borrowed? Did she actually had the genuine intention when she first asked for the assistance with a promise to return the money? All these questions are only known to Jane and Rogers what their intentions were. But the whole issue got more complicated when sexual intimacy was weaved into it, what was in itself a dicey relationship and situation. Contrast the experience of Jane and Rogers to that of Nick Clegg's liberal dame's abolition of tuition fee promise in 2010. You will find that the consequence of both secondary and line promise you will find that the consequences of both secondary and first primary line promises carries almost similar repercussions. Fair promise arising among strangers is as devastating as fair promise in an intimate relationship. A breach, as Markowitz has asserted, does not return the parties to where they started. In the case of Nick Clegg's Liberal Dames Party, they suffered severe consequences of the breach of promise in 2015, local election, where they were almost completely wiped out, and they lost almost all the seats and the gains of 2010 election. This demonstrates vividly the characteristics and consequences of fair promise. That one, that of revenge. Fair promise evokes hurting feelings, and some people can be unforgiving and may even resort to revenge as a way of dealing with the hurt. 2. Anger. Fair promise breeds anger, which could develop to aggressive and violent behavior if not well managed. Finally, but not the least, hopelessness. One of the serious consequences of fair promise is hopelessness. It could develop to mood swings and anger. And this could further develop to mental issues and higher risks of suicide, withdrawal, isolation, and so on and so forth. Ladies and gentlemen, we must at all costs avoid the temptations of making promises we either cannot keep or do not have the intention to keep. Most people may never have thought of the consequences of failed promise, as we have succinctly laid out here on Knowledge Line. For those of us that are Christians and familiar with the scriptures, has it ever occurred to you why the Lord Jesus, in advising on promise, said, just say a simple yes or no? If in any other thing, there could be evil. I do agree with him that once you have said, yes, I will, you must do all you can to keep it. A friend said to me, this thing about promise keeping is sometimes so hard and difficult to actually observe. I totally agree, but the solution is to begin to cultivate the character and will of not committing yourself. It takes discipline and courage, but it is the beginning of freedom and road to happiness. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I thank you all for listening and being part of this all-interesting, though heated conversation. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You can also write to me for questions on any of the issues we have treated in this and previous episodes. My email handle is tokonma.knowledgeline@gmail.com. You can also text me or call on +447513314905 for orders on copies of my books, and I will get them delivered to you. Or you may visit www.amazon.com. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for being part of all this interesting conversation, and I thank you for listening. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, and bye.